Hello everyone and welcome! And here it is, the Duke Nukem of League of Legends joined the battlefield once again. And with it we got the opportunity to learn a bit more about the past.
I might be made of stone, but that doesn't mean my heart is.
This story began in the aftermath of the Rune Wars. During these times, refugees from all around Runeterra fled from the destructive power of magic. Some say that in the west of Valoran, a group of these people was pursued by a band of dark mages. Exhausted from days without rest, the refugees hid among the shadows of an ancient petrified forest. And although the dark mages found them hiding, they suddenly found their magic to be ineffective in these strange woods. It seemed the fossilized trees were a natural magic dampener, and any sorcery used within them would simply fizzle upon casting. No longer helpless, the refugees turned their swords on the dark mages and drove them from the land. Some decided this sanctuary from magic was a gift from the gods. Others saw it as a fair reward for their terrible journey. But all agreed that this should be their new home. As years passed, they learned how to craft items from the enchanted wood. When mixed with ash and lime, it would make petricite, a material with a powerful resistance to magic. They used it as the foundation for their new civilization, forming the walls for their new kingdom of Demacia. For years, these petricite barriers were all the Demacians needed to feel secure. In the rare occasion when they needed to settle a conflict abroad, their military proved to be fierce and formidable. But when their enemies brought in sorcery, Demacia's army had little to counter it. The elders of the kingdom decided that somehow they needed to take the security of their magic dampening walls into battle. They commissioned the sculptor Durant to make them a form of a petricite shield for the military. And 2 years later, the artist revealed his masterpiece. While it was not what many were expecting, the great winged statue Galio would become vital to the defense of the nation, also serving as the symbol of Demacia's might across Runeterra. Each time the army was deployed to face magical threat, they would mobilize Galio, using countless oxen to push it forward and bring it to the battlefield. The presence of that much petricite easily nullified almost any arcane attacks, giving the people who had once fled from magic the ability to face it head-on in an open warfare. Many invaders were paralyzed by the very sight of the inspiring figure that loomed above the trees before them. The titan who ate magic inspired a kingdom and terrified those who opposed it. All the while, no one thought to consider what exposing the statue to such untold amounts of arcane energy might do. During a battle against Noxian forces in the Green Fang Mountains of northern Valoran, they were surprised to see Noxians assembled an elite group of war mages known as the Arcane Fist. To the Demacians' shock, these mages were so powerful they could tear through Galio's anti-magic field. For 13 days, the Demacian army was pounded by their foes, and those who survived felt their morale evaporating by the hour. Just as their spirits couldn't be brought any lower, they heard the familiar thunder of arcane explosions tearing through their ranks. But this time, the explosions were followed by a new sound, a slow, deafening rumble that shook the veil. As a great shadow grew above them, the terrified Demacian troops shuddered, steeling themselves for death.
"Shall we fight?"
bellowed a deep voice above them. To the Demacians' astonishment, the sound came from the towering Colossus at their backs. Galio was moving and speaking entirely on his own. Somehow the accumulation of absorbed magic had given him life. The stunned onlookers gaped at the titan, struggling to make sense of what they were seeing. Before they could comprehend it, another blazing projectile descended toward the Demacian camp on a perfect trajectory to wipe out the few remaining soldiers. Galio threw himself in front of the troops, shielding them and absorbing the attack with his massive stone frame. Galio turned toward the source of the projectile and spotted 5 tiny humans on the slopes of a neighboring mountain.
"Enemy mages, let us make violence,"
shouted the Colossus. As he approached them, the Noxians focused all their efforts into a concentrated funnel of arcane energy that would have melted almost any stone in Valoran. But even with all their might released, Galio stood still, eyes closed and glowing warmly, as if he was drinking from the offending magic. Then Galio continued up the slopes and squashed the first arcane fist into the craggy soil. The remaining Noxian forces fled, and the surviving Demacians erupted with cheers of victory. They were eager to thank the petrified sentinel that had saved their lives, but as quickly as he had come to life, the fearsome protector had ceased moving, returning to the same pose he had always held up on the pedestal. Back home, those who survived told the bizarre tale of the living Colossus, but it was always met with silent response, as if those were the tales of a madman. Eventually, those who witnessed the animation of Galio simply stopped talking about it, fearing that people would question their sanity. It became a mere legend, perhaps an allegory invented in the ancient days to help people get through hard times. But what no one from the four corners of the kingdom knew is that Galio maintained his consciousness. He couldn't move, but he could see and hear everything happening around him. And he longed to join another fight. Punching enemies with giant stone fists was thrilling, but being trapped in a gargantuan stone body was tragic. Forced to observe in silence, Galio watched the humans pass beneath him, paying him tribute year after year like a distant hazy dream. Though he knew very little about them individually, he began to feel as though he knew them as people. It puzzled him to see them disappear one by one as time rolled on, seemingly replaced by new bodies with new lives of their own. He wondered where they went when they vanished. Perhaps they were sent away to be mended, as Galio was when he returned from a fight? After one of many battles against the barbarians of the Freljord, Galio saw long columns of men carrying what looked like draped cots back into the city. As they walked past him, one of the coverings fell away, revealing the still, pallid face of a young soldier. He was a boy Galio had seen before, and the Colossus could not understand why someone so bold would choose to be carried on a covered litter around the city. Galio began to realize the sorrowful answer of his question. Unlike himself, people could not be repainted or have their damage easily repaired. Humans were frail, and he now understood just how much they needed his protection. Fighting had been his passion, but the people were now his purpose. Since then, Galio was able to join the fight only a handful of times, sometimes going centuries without moving. Magic is rarer in the world than it once was, perhaps because of an unsung hero we have talked about before. Galio's greatest hope is to be blessed by magic so powerful he would never be forced to sleep again. Only then can Galio truly serve his purpose, to forever stand and fight as Demacia's constant protector. Years passed and another war was approaching. They expected magic to be present, so once again, they brought Galio with them into the battle. Galio saw the barbarian horde in the distance. Their ranks were sloppy and undisciplined. They walked with the hunger for Demacian blood. Galio heard the tales about these warriors before, especially now after their recent conquests. He heard they won't leave anyone alive, and that they mount the heads of their foes on enormous tusks from strange beasts. But the barbarians were of no interest to the Colossus. His eyes found the bigger prize, a titanic shape seeming almost as tall as the hills behind it. It moved ominously, heaving like the waves of a troubled sea, waiting to be unleashed.
What is that?
Thought Galio hopefully.
I hope it fights.
Beneath him, Demacian comrades marched in perfect unison. They chanted battle songs. To each other, they sounded confident in their victory. But to Galio, who had heard this song many times before, their rhythm was less certain, more hesitant. They were not excited to battle this great beast.
I will do it for them.
Galio wanted to scoop each and every one of the soldiers up and tell them it is going to be fine. But he couldn't. Not in this state.
I hope there's a mage this time.
He thought, gazing toward the horizon.
Usually there isn't. I hate it when there isn't.
Moments later, the cart finally stopped at the edge of the battlefield. He knew there would be no parley, no chance that the savage enemy would surrender. Galio could hear his soldiers locking their shields, forming a solid wall of steel. But he knew whatever the beast was, it would easily tear through them. The two sides flew at each other, colliding in a flash of limbs and blades. Galio heard swords clashing and axes meeting shields. Men from both armies were falling. Brave voices that Galio knew well cried like children for their mothers. The soft heart in the stone giant began to quiver. Yet, still he could not break his paralysis. Suddenly, a shock of blinding purple seared through the fray, causing scores of Demacians to drop to their knees. Galio felt it then, that familiar sensation in his fingertips, like the noon sun warming cool alabaster. He could almost wiggle them. The flash came again, sapping the life from more heroic Demacian soldiers, and with it, Galio gained his senses, finally witnessing the full bloody scale of the battle. In the distance behind the Noxian lines, their cowardly mage was summoning a crackling orb between his hands, readying his next attack.
There he is. He is the reason I wake.
Galio realized, first in gratitude, then in rage.
I will squash him first.
But his attention was once again drawn to the monstrous shape in the furthest reaches of the battlefield. Finally, it was coming into focus. A towering behemoth of a creature, covered in thick muddied fur. It struggled against the steel chains that restrained it. Its head thrashed about viciously in an attempt to free itself from the giant blinding cowl that covered its eyes. Galio smiled.
Now that is a foe worthy of my fists.
The barbarians pulled off the coverings, revealing a snarling mangled snout. Free from its blinders, the creature erupted in a fearsome roar. The monster handlers released a mechanism that let loose the chains, and the behemoth threw itself into the Demacian army. Galio was horrified. These were the men he had guarded since they were children. He wanted to weep for them, as he had seen humans do in mourning, but he was not built for that. This was a huge, terrible beast, and he couldn't wait to put his hands on it. He could feel the vitality of life returning to him. The sensation shot through his arms, his head, and all the way to his legs. For the first time in a century, he could move. Across the valley, a sound echoed, something not heard in living memory. It was the sound of a stone giant's laughter. Galio leapt into the fray, knocking aside the barbarians' crudely built siege engines. Friend and foe alike stopped to gape at the stone titan who was now smashing his way through the front lines. Like a living monument, he burst from the press of soldiers and threw himself into the path of the rampaging behemoth.
Hello, great beast.
He rumbled.
Shall I smash you?
The creature threw its mighty head back and howled, as if in acknowledgement of the challenge. Both titans ran toward one another in earth-shaking force. The behemoth slammed into Galio's midsection with its shoulder. It let out a groan of intense pain as it crumpled to the ground, clutching its collarbone. Galio stood above it, considering whether to smash his opponent or not.
Come on now, no need to feel bad,
said Galio, eagerly motioning with his hand.
That was a good try. Now hit me again.
The monster slowly pulled itself to its feet and regained the angry glint in its eye. It struck Galio with all its might, its claws raking away a piece of his head.
You broke my crown,
said the Colossus, pleasantly surprised, encouraged by the hope of a competitive fight. He struck the beast with the bottom of his hand, swinging it down like a club with every ounce of his stone frame. The petrified fist collided with the behemoth's flesh, and the surrounding field rang out with the cracking of the gigantic bones. The monster staggered, screaming and swinging blindly, but connecting with nothing. Galio grabbed the giant beast around its waist with his monolithic arms and wrenched its torso, trying to break its spine. but the behemoth twisted from his grip and began to circle him warily before backing away.
Wait! Our battle must be resolved!
Bellowed the Colossus. He started to run after the beast, hoping it would reconsider its decision to flee, but the feint of cries from his Demacian brethren carried to him on the wind. Without realizing, Galio had followed the monster for hundreds of feet away from the heart of the battle. He wanted to fight the creature, but his human comrades needed him. As the abomination limped away into the distance, Galio gave it one last gaze.
Farewell, great beast!
He turned and thundered back to his comrades. More than half of them were laying on the ground in agony, tortured by the unseen coils of power. He knew at once it was the same magic that kept him alive. The Stone Titan saw the terror in the soldiers' faces, before turning to the mage once more. Galio knew what he must do, and what the consequences would be. He leapt high into the air and came down crashing onto the mage. The remaining invaders were routed, dropping their arms in terror and fleeing in all directions. As the sorcerer's magic faded, Galio felt conflicted. The animating force was draining from his body. He had saved countless lives, but he was being dragged back to slumber. He didn't understand why he had no magic of his own, like all living things must have. Why had he been made this way? Had that even been his creator's intention? As he felt the cold embrace of his dormancy returning, he took comfort that life itself was magical. And if Galio only experienced it briefly, it was worth it. Until the final day, until he would come to break the world's last mage in his unyielding fist, and the stone sentinel of Demacia would awaken no more.
They made me to stop magic, and yet I hate when it's gone.
And that was the story of the Colossus of Demacia. I really like how his story plays into the stories about Demacia we have heard before. Good example is Poppy's story. We now know why Orlon led his caravan to these lands. He was leading his people to a safe place where he could build a city, which of course became Demacia. But enough of that for now. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to this channel because there probably will be more Demacian stories. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Discord if you are the chattier type. And with that, thank you so much for watching and for your feedback, you know I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you come again.